Croeso pawb to my video on the comparison between the PSVR1 and the PSVR2. I've had the first one since launch, I recently picked up the second one, and now that the Saints and Sinners Walking Dead is available on both, I feel it's got a good basis to compare the two. This isn't really a review, so if you're looking for game reviews etc, you're not going to find that here. But if you want to know what the new headset is like, and how it compares to the old one, then this is a good place for you. You'll probably enjoy this video. Okay, first things first, the setup. The PSVR1 has some complicated setup, with a lot of cables and a splitter box. It's a bit of a faff to set up, but once it's done the first time, you don't really have to touch it much after. You can just leave the cable tucked away and access it when you need to, which is pretty convenient. So it's not too much of a pain once it's set up. Pretty much if the camera can see you, it just works, which is really user friendly after the initial setup. With the new headset, it's just one USB-C cable, so it's very easy to set up and very easy to connect anytime you want to use it. The only downside is, it's got a really long and kind of boring software setup, which is really annoying, especially if you've owned the first one. It covers stuff that you really don't need to cover, and it's just annoying to go through. It takes forever. And on a side note, if you've got multiple users on your PlayStation, every time you connect it on an account where it hasn't been set up on, you have to do the entire setup process again. So if you're someone that has a lot of accounts, just be aware that every time you switch accounts and you haven't used it on that account before, you're going to have to go through the whole setup again, which is really annoying. Including setting up the play area again, because it can't load it from another account, which is dumb. It should save it to the console and ask you if you want to use it, but it doesn't. Either way though, once you've done the setup process on whatever accounts you want to use it on, you don't have to do it again, so at least that's going for it. But my biggest problem with the setup in general for the second one is the play area. Now the idea of being able to map it out to your play area, having it whatever shape or space that is available to you, is really cool in theory. The only problem is during the setup process, it doesn't let you do it properly. Now this is going to be hard to understand if you haven't set one up yourself already, but when you map it out, if the area you map out is not 2 by 2 meters square, then it'll basically say you can't do room scale VR, which is where you walk around and interact in a large area. And if that's the case, it'll set up a temporary play area, which is basically a pillar for you to stand in. And the problem with this is, it's not very big, so literally without even taking a step, if you lean too far in a direction, you'll hit the edge of this column and it'll throw up a big wire grid warning you that you're leaving the area. Even if you've got 3 foot in that direction, so you're not going to hit anything, it just puts this artificial limitation on you, which is really frustrating, and I wanted to kill the thing when it was doing this initially. But, big tip for anyone that owns one of these, ignore it. Once you've set it up, and it does that, just go back into the settings and reset up the play area again, and when you do it in the settings, it'll say this isn't big enough for room scale. Do you want to ignore this? And you can just go yes, ignore it, and it just uses the exact shape of the area you've mapped out instead, which is stupid. Why the setup process makes you have a temporary area which ruins your enjoyment and ruins the usability of the VR is so dumb. It should just have the same features it does in the settings, where you can just say, I don't care, ignore this, and just let it map out the custom area. Oh my god. It's good that it works that way, but it should work that way at all times, because the setup process will mislead people, and it will ruin their experience unless they find this out for themselves, which is just really stupid. Now luckily after you've discovered this, and you've got your custom play area set up, or you're lucky enough to have an area bigger than 2 by 2 meters square so you don't even have to care about this issue, then everything runs smoothly after that, which is really nice. That was a huge frustration when I first got it, and I'm glad I found a way around it. It would have really annoyed me if I didn't have that fixed, because there's no point being in VR if it's going to constantly throw up fake walls in it that ruins the experience for you constantly. One of the other considerations I had when I first started playing the new one was the detection for the controllers, because it uses the headset to detect the controllers. When I first tested it in No Man's Sky, I had problems accessing some of the features. If I was driving a car or a submarine or something in No Man's Sky, and the headset couldn't see my hands, then it would lose tracking, and all of the controls would just go all over the place, and it was completely, maybe not completely, but it made it very unplayable, because if your hands were on the edge of its detection range, it would just constantly mess up and you couldn't control the vehicles properly. Now No Man's Sky was garbage when they converted it to VR1, so I'm no surprise there's a bit crap on VR2 as well. It's not exactly the best game to use for a benchmark for this stuff, because the people that develop it don't really seem to know what they're doing. and I'll stand by that. They messed up the game early on. They've made a ton of changes since, not all of them for the better, and to be honest I liked the game 4 or 5 versions back, before it was a microtransaction riddled buggy mess. But that's another day for another story. Either way, it gave me that concern, and I'm happy to say that now I've played it more and I've played different things, it's not an issue. I've played shooting games, I've played adventure games, played horror games, played a few different things now, and they work really well. Pretty much the only limitation to the new PSVR2 is that if you pick up something to read or an item to look at and you bring it close to your face, it blocks the cameras on the headset and loses tracking completely, and it just pops up saying, "Oh, I can't see your room, what's going on?" and it freaks out. At first I didn't realise why it was doing that, I just thought it was buggy, but then I realised it's because I'm picking things up to look at them. Like it might be a note or something in the game, and when I bring it up to my face to read it, my hands and the controllers are blocking the cameras on the headset so it can't track the room. If you play games and you have that happen a few times, it might be that. It might be that you're bringing things near to your face and blocking the tracking of the headset, which is kind of annoying, especially because some things you're going to want to bring to your face for certain games, whether it's holding guns up to your face, or whether it's trying to read things or examine items. It's just going to be something that you're going to have to keep in mind while using the VR. Now what I will say is that doesn't happen in the first PSVR. That wasn't an issue. You could bring things to your face and it literally didn't matter. It didn't make any difference at all. The only issues you'd have occasionally is if you brought something to your face in a way that blocked too many of the lights on the headset to the camera that's viewing you, then it would throw the tracking off a little bit. But if you're not using an aim controller or something big, or you've got your camera in a stupid position, it's like never an issue on the first PSVR headset. But it does have a similar issue, so I thought I'd mention it, but it's definitely worse on the second than the first. Although in all, both of them don't have any tracking issues really, not from what I've seen. I'm just noting the things that I've noticed, just so you know. Now the biggest problem I had with the new PSVR2 was the USB cable that connects it to the console. It can't be replaced, there's no disconnection on it, and that really annoyed me because I'm like, at some point I'm going to stand on this, or a dog's going to chew it, or it's just going to be rolled up the wrong way in the box, and if it breaks, you kind of out of luck. Now I've looked into teardown videos since then, and I found out that you can replace the cable if you disassemble the entire headband, and if you can get another cable from somewhere, because it's a fancy USB-C cable that has an integrated power supply cable as well. So it's not something you can just do yourself, unless you're like technically minded, or you've got experience in disassembling other sort of technology. Like for the average user I wouldn't recommend it. But if you can get those cables either from Sony, or you can get them from a third party like you can with the first PSVR headset, it might be worth picking up a few spare, even if they're not as good as the first one, and then at least you've got the option of swapping them if you need to. It's not the best situation, they should have made it easily replaceable with any USB-C cable, and then it would have been a lot better. But hey, I'm not in charge of their development department, so you know, miracles can't happen. It's not like they've got decades worth of technological development in their background or anything, is there? Oh no, wait, they do, they have no excuse. So it's not as annoying as before because they can be replaced, sort of, if you can be bothered, but it's just something they could have done better with in general. Now I did bring up in my early impressions video that I felt that the comfiness of the new one might not be as good as the first one. The padding for the first one is a sponge pad that's covered in material and then a rubber coating. And then the padding for the new one is like a rubber, if I say a rubber tire, like on a push bike, you'll get what I mean. It feels like a pad, but there's nothing inside, it's hollow, so it's kinda like a tire from a bike. It's a rubber outer shell with air inside, and there are some sort of like spring sort of padded things inside. There might be some little spring-loaded pads or something. In any case, it's not as good as the first one. It's comfortable enough, and if you haven't used the first one, you probably won't care. But if you've used the first one is definitely more comfortable. Now, I'm sure you could fix it yourself if you cut open the second one and put foam inside of the second one. But that's not something I'm going to try anytime soon. But you can replace the pads. So I'm hoping at some point that Sony release other ones, or more premium ones as well, that'd be nice. I mean, I reupholstered my first one, which is why it's got leather on it now, instead of rubber. So maybe I'll just fix it myself at some point. In any case, the first one's more comfortable, the second one's not uncomfortable, it's just not as good as the first one. I've heard some people have problems with the nose as well. If you've got a massive nose, then it might cause problems. I've seen some people say that it rests on the bridge of their nose and it causes issues. I haven't had that problem, and I'm willing to say it could be user error because there's a lot of fiddling around to get it to line up with your eyes properly so that the eye detection works. So I'm going to go out on a limb and say people are lazy, or maybe they're just incompetent, who knows. In any case, if you don't line it up with your eyes properly and spend the time to do it when you put it on, you could cause that problem yourself when it's not the headset's fault. I've had no problems, but I don't have a Concorde on my face, so I wouldn't really be the one to ask about that. So the first one is definitely more comfy, really good, no complaints with that. The PSVR2 is comfy enough. I've used it for like 3 hours at a time and haven't had any problems. But when watching movies in it, I have had it so it's not as comfortable, and I think that's to do with the tensioning. In the first one, because of the padding, you didn't have to tighten the headband down as much, but because this one doesn't have any padding in the pads, you have to really crank it down to get it nice and tight so it doesn't move. But if you get it too tight, then it hurts your head. So I haven't quite worked out the balance for that yet, but it's comfy enough. It works well. I've had zero problems in general. I just don't understand why they couldn't put a 10 pence piece of foam in it just to make it better. Now on to the controllers. I've used the new PSVR2 controllers a fair bit now in a few different games and for extended periods of time, and I do think they've missed a trick with them. I think they should have put 4 buttons on each, not just 2 face buttons, because the original controllers for the PSVR1 have way more buttons, and these ones have barely any in comparison. That wasn't a problem for the games I played, but they relied a lot more on interaction in real life. So I mean like picking up weapons from your hip or your shoulder, or storing items by putting them on your shoulder or in your pocket or wherever. It uses a lot more gestures because it just doesn't have a lot of buttons on the controllers. Now that's not a problem at the moment, but I'm worried at some point there'll be a game that'll need more buttons, and the lack of them might be an issue at some point. So right now it doesn't really matter, but I'm kind of thinking if they had an extra 2 buttons on each controller, it wouldn't make a difference right now, but it would be more flexible in the future. So I'm like, why didn't they just do that? And now the biggest issue with the controllers, the size of them and how they fit your hand. I don't have huge hands, and they just about fit mine. They're comfortable enough, but they are small enough that my hands do get jammed in them sometimes, and reaching certain buttons isn't comfortable. I'm hoping at some point they release a bigger version of them, like an XL or Pro set of controllers, that are just more comfortable, bigger, and have longer battery life. That'd be really cool. Although ideally they should have just done that in the first place, and then they wouldn't need to make 2 sets of them. I've played games for 3 hours with them, and in general they're fine, but there's no excuse for them being this small. If you've got big hands, my advice would be to try them somewhere first if you can, just to get an idea of them, because they're annoying for me, not very often, and they don't ruin the games or anything, but it is something that is an issue, even if it's only a slight one. And I know everyone hates the controllers from the first PSVR headset, but they don't have any of those issues. They're the right size, they fit any hand, they don't restrict your hand movement in any way, you can reach all of the controls very easily. Outside of the fact they don't have analog sticks, they're pretty much fine apart from that. I've never had any issues with them at all in any games I've played on the PSVR1. And also with the new PSVR2 controllers, because there's like a cage around them, occasionally they'll bump into each other when you're doing stuff, like if you're trying to cock a gun, or reload a gun, or in general trying to do things with 2 hands on one object, they can bump into each other sometimes. It's not a constant thing, and it doesn't ruin anything, but it does happen occasionally, and it does mean you have to alter the way you move sometimes to accommodate them. It's not really a huge deal, but it is something that again didn't happen with the PSVR1 controllers, because they didn't have a cage or ring around them. I understand it's a limitation in the new tech they're using, so it's not really a complaint, it's more of an acknowledgement that there's something there you need to consider when playing with them. Now another consideration I had was battery life. For the original PSVR1 controllers, I charge them every few months and they last forever. You can use them for 8 hours a day for weeks and they won't run out of charge. They're fantastic. That definitely is not the same for the new PSVR2 controllers. Now, fully charged, I played The Walking Dead for about 3 hours, and at the end of it, the battery readout on the PlayStation said they were still full, which is obviously a lie because there's no way they're full after 3 hours of use, because they're only supposed to last 6 hours. But I did have trigger resistance and haptic feedback turned off for my controller settings. Now I think that affects your PSVR2 controllers as well. I think they're supposed to have different settings, but I need to verify whether they actually ignore the settings for your other controllers, because I turned that stuff off for the online games I play because it was annoying, and I think that saved a lot of battery life while using them. So I'm not willing to say the battery life on them is amazing, because I'm sure if you played the game for extended amount of time, with the trigger resistance and the haptic feedback working or being used a lot, I'm sure it would drain the battery really quick compared to how I was using them anyway. So I would say they're sufficient, but I've also looked up teardown videos for the controllers, and the batteries fill up the space. There's not like you can add a bigger battery in yourself, even if you could buy one yourself. So unless you can get more dense batteries than the ones they've used, you pretty much are out of luck. If the battery's not good enough for what you want, you can't upgrade them. Oh well, maybe you could, but like I said, you'd need a more dense battery, so I'd have to look into that more, but it's unlikely at the moment. In any case, if they do make a bigger designed controller for this, they might as well add an extra battery life in there as well, so I'm hoping that's the case if they do make bigger controllers for this at some point. Oh, you also can't charge the controllers while you're using them either, which would have been nice because you could have just, put a little battery bank on your wrist or something and plugged it in, but no, you can't do that, so if they run out, you gotta stop playing. It's not been an issue for me so far, but like I said, it's something you need to be aware of, just so you know. Now, one of my big annoyances when I first started testing the PSVR2 was that the capture footage only captures the right eye. Now at the time I'd only played No Man's Sky, and I can say since then that it's different depending on the game. But every game only records either the left or the right eye. They don't record a combined version of the two to have a central view, which is really annoying. And that's why in this video you'll see that all the footage I'm using is being edited in various ways so that it's actually centered, or that you get a better view. Which is fine for me because I know how to edit video, but for anyone that just wants a user-friendly way to show people videos, it's really annoying and off-putting if all of the sort of function and focus of the video is like in 1/3 of it. It's just really weird. You don't really notice why at first, you just get a feeling that something's off, and then you realise it. It's just annoying. Why they didn't combine both eyes or just crop one of them to be better, I don't know. But it's something that they could have done better on, and they should have done better on. Doesn't really affect me too much because again, I can video edit, but it's just an annoyance that doesn't need to exist really. Okay, now we're on to the interesting stuff, the graphics comparison. In general, I don't have a problem with the graphics for the PSVR1. Yes, they're not as good as the PSVR2, obviously it's a PS4 compared to a PS5, but there's a few things to consider with the PSVR1. Number one, the headset is not as clear as the second one, which means that you can have graphics that aren't perfect. And by the time you view them through the VR headset, it doesn't really matter too much, because the combination of the headset and the lenses etc. will either cover up some of those issues, or they'll make it so the issues don't really matter at all. Because if you've got bad graphics, but the headset can't display amazingly clear graphics, it kinda doesn't matter too much. The PSVR1 footage has a lot of aliasing on it, which if you don't know what that is, it's jaggedness around the edges of stuff in 3D. PSVR1 has a lot of that, especially in games like Star Wars Squadrons. That has a lot of aliasing in it. When you view it through the headset, it hides a lot of that, so it looks way better in the headset than it does in the recorded footage. So again, I'm not saying the PSVR1 graphics are amazing, but what I'm saying is they're appropriate for the headset capabilities, so I don't really say too much bad stuff about them, because in VR, it's really great anyway. And for the video footage, yeah, some of the stuff can look a bit rough, but it's a combination of things that don't really matter when you're actually playing the game. And for the PSVR2, the graphics are way better. It's a huge step up, and because the headset is crystal clear when you're in a game, it's really good. They go hand in hand, and you just see really impressive visuals when you're playing games in it. Thanks to the graphical increase in power, there's no aliasing anymore, so everything looks crisp and clear, and really good. Now I've heard some people say there's a screen door effect with the headset, and I would agree. I do notice it when watching movies and things like that. It's kinda like there's a faint film grain over the picture that you see in the headset, and that doesn't rotate with your head. So if you look straight and then you angle your head to the left and right, then you can see that it rotates with your head movement, and then that really makes it obvious. But when playing games, I don't even notice it. Now this may be different for some games other than others, but I've played a few at this point, and in general it's not a problem at all in game. And it's outside of in-game where you see issues. If you're in the PlayStation menus, or if you're watching movies in it, you'll see the rainbow effect that people talk about, the chromatic aberration I think it's called, around letters and writing, where it looks kinda like it's smeared with Vaseline, or it's got little rainbows coming off it. In games you don't see that at all. Now it's an effect of the lens they used So it's not something that you can solve or get rid of, it's just something that happens in some uses. But like I said, it's mainly in the menus, or watching movies, but it only affects not the movie, if that makes sense. Like if there's text on screen or something, you might see a little bit, but if you're watching a movie, the movie looks fine. It's just text, predominantly, and menus. Yeah, on the home screen you'll be like, oh, this looks awful, but then when you get into a game, it looks great, which kind of makes you wonder, why does it look like that in the PlayStation menus? Maybe they'll make a VR mode where they get rid of that. I mean, I suppose they could. If it looks better in VR games, then I don't see why they can't just make a VR interface for the PS5, which would get rid of that. I mean, it's kind of pointless because you don't exactly sit in the menus for any amount of time, so it doesn't really matter. But just be aware that in the menus you will see things that aren't in the games. I usually just ignore the menus. I'll load up the headset, get into a game, then I'll adjust my eye position and all of that. I don't do it in the menus because the menus will never look perfect, whereas in the game you'll get a much better idea of what changes and the effect that they have in the game will be. Now, while I've been talking, I've thrown up some examples of the footage. Now, I don't have footage for all of the games I've played in VR, but some of the ones I have I've been using as examples, so you can see roughly what the PSVR1 graphics level is like, and then roughly what the PSVR2 graphics level is like. Now, because I had the Saints and Sinners Walking Dead for PSVR1, and then I got the upgrade to PSVR2, I've gone through the first mission, or the first day or two, on both, and I've got footage from both. So I'm going to throw up some examples of what the graphics like in both, and then you can get an idea of the difference. Now, I will say with a huge caveat, the PSVR2 version isn't dedicated for PSVR2. It was a port of the PSVR1, so don't expect it to be amazing on one and not the other. It's more just to give you an example of what the graphics look like in both, or the differences for the same game. Because obviously if a game is made specifically for PSVR2 and specifically for PSVR1, the PSVR2 one is going to be head and toes above it. But out of the games that are on both at the moment, this is probably the best one to check out, because, you know, it's an amazing game with a load of different content and features to compare. In any case, take it for what you want. The comparisons on screen, the PSVR2 is better. But I've got to say, more than anything, when I was doing this and editing this footage together, the PSVR1 really impresses me. The graphics it can output are way better than I thought they were. I thought the PSVR2 would be so much above and beyond it, but it's not. It's better, definitely, in a load of different ways, but you're not losing features. You're still getting the same levels, the same gameplay. You're just getting much better visuals, which is fine, but you're not getting a different experience, if that makes sense. It's just better in every way, but at the moment, you're not seeing gameplay or features that you couldn't also have on the PSVR1, just with worse graphics. Out of the things I've tried on PSVR2, I was really impressed with the graphics for Resident Evil 8 Village. That, I've only played the demo for that, but the graphics were really good. There was a really cool part of the demo where you stepped out onto a cliff edge and you could see the whole town and the castle in the background, and you can see in the footage I stopped to take in the view. It was really cool, and I was like, wow, this isn't even made for VR, and it's beautiful. It made me really look forward to what they can do with it in the future, because if that's an indication of what they can do when they just port in the game to it, or what they could make when it's dedicated for VR too, who knows? It's going to be magical, that's for sure. And in general, with the demo for Resident Evil 8, the graphics were really good. Walking around the levels and that, everything looked really good, really immersive, realistic. In PSVR1, the views and environments were impressive, but in PSVR2, the clarity and the quality of the view is far more impressive than with the first one. The crystal clear headset just makes a huge difference to what you can see in the details of the world you're in. Now, the most important thing for this comparison, the gameplay. In general, I would say that the gameplay between the first VR headset and the second VR headset is pretty much almost identical. Now, some people are probably going to be really annoyed about that opinion, but there's slight improvements, not revolutionary between the two, I would say. So, for example, in movement, and again I'm going to be using The Walking Dead because they're the same game on both headsets, so I can literally compare apples to apples here. With the first VR headset, because it doesn't have analog sticks, you could move by tilting the controller slightly while holding a button, and then you could use other buttons to rotate on the spot. Now, the only problem I had with that system was the rotating on the spot, because snap rotation is kind of annoying, But apart from that, the moving with the tilting was amazing. I wish more VR games in the PSVR1 used that technique because it worked really well and it gives you full, free-flowing movement. It's annoying more games don't use that technique because it's really good. Now it is better having analog sticks on the PSVR2 controllers because obviously you get much better control of movement, although it's more to do with rotation. Because like I said, the tilt to move works really well in the first one, but having the analog stick to look left and right and rotate, that was much better. And it's more intuitive because everyone's used analog sticks. But hey, if you're willing to get used to the old one, you're not going to have an issue, you'll be moving just fine. And you can see in the footage on screen, I'm moving around in both, and you can clearly see I have no issue with movement at all. So, people hate the controllers for the first PSVR, but again, I've used a lot of games in it, and I have very little issues with them at all. They don't have analog sticks, but they're more than functional. Now, the one issue I did have with the new PSVR2 controllers was aiming guns. The PSVR1 controllers, they're round with a trigger, so that when they sit in your hand, they pretty much sit one way and just aim forward. So they're very natural, you can just point them at something and then pull the trigger and you're more than likely going to hit it. It's very intuitive, it's just point and trigger. Point and trigger. Aiming is very intuitive and nice with the first PSVR controllers. Now with the new ones, because of the shape of them, they can be slightly off axis. So when you're holding them and you're pointing them at something, it can be slightly twisted to the right or slightly twisted to the left. And you don't feel it, like intuitively you don't pick up on that. So you pull the trigger and it goes bang and nothing happens and you're like, did I miss that? Or did I hit it and it just didn't register? And then you soon realise, especially if you're actually paying attention to the sights on the VR guns, that it's like slightly off. Now once you realise that, you adapt straight away and it works fine, but they are slightly less intuitive than the original PSVR1 controllers. It's not a big deal. Once you've noticed it, you get used to it, you can aim using the sights and whatever. It's not really an issue. And if you've never played the first PSVR1, you probably won't even have a comparison, so it's not going to be an issue at all. But for me, the first ones are slightly more intuitive for aiming. They're not better, they're not worse, they're just easier to learn. Both are perfectly functional, and both you can get really good with aiming with, so it's not really an issue. It's just something else I noticed while using them. And again, in the examples I'm putting up, you can see in both games I can aim and fire the guns and hit stuff relatively consistently, so it's fine, it's really no issue. So as a wrap up to the controllers, the functionality of both, they're pretty much identical. The PSVR1 has more buttons, but it lacks analog sticks. The PSVR2 has analog sticks, but less buttons, and they don't suit bigger hands, and have the issue of being a bit restrictive with the cage that surrounds your hand. But in general, there's no real winner with the controllers. Both can be improved, and neither's perfect, but they're both fully functional, and you can play games with them no problem. No major issues with either really. So now we're at the conclusion of this video, and I guess you expect me to, crown a winner and make fun of the loser. I'm not going to do that. That doesn't mean there's not a better headset. The PSVR2 is a better quality headset for gameplay. It's not quite as comfy, but it's comfy enough. The repairability of the cable is an annoyance that they should have done better with, but it's not going to stop me using it, that's for sure. And out of the controllers, I would say that I slightly prefer the original design more than the new ones. Now, the caveat of that opinion is that with inside-out tracking on the new PSVR2, you couldn't use the controllers from the first one, and I'm not saying you should either, because they're not fit for purpose really. But having the ring that tracks the hand controllers be around your hand is too restrictive without it being bigger, so they give you more room, but then they would bump into each other more, so in general I think they could do with a redesign. They're not bad as they are right now, but they could have done better. It would give more ease of access to the buttons, it would fit more people's hands better, it would be more user-friendly and more usable in general. They're good enough right now, but they can do better if they want to in the future. Now the biggest problem the PSVR2 has right now is that it doesn't have a lot of games, and especially a lot of people are saying, oh, they're just games ported from the other headsets, why would you bother? Well, here's the thing, most people don't buy multiple VR headsets. So most people that bought a PSVR2 either have never had a VR headset before, or they don't own the Meta Quest, or an Oculus, or a Vive, so they probably haven't played the games being ported over. So I really don't like that opinion in general. I don't care if they're ported. There are probably better versions on the PS5 anyway, so it's really a dumb argument to me. It's like if you buy the headset, you probably won't have that issue, because you probably haven't played the games on anything else, so it doesn't really matter. My big issue with the game situation is that Sony don't seem to have invested in it as much as they did with the first one. There was a ton of games that launched on the first one, and there was a huge lineup announced as well. Now there were some games that came out for this one, and there are some being announced, and there are more being announced semi-regularly, so I'm not completely disappointed, but I was expecting that Sony would at least fund more first-party ones for the launch. Now, I was really excited for the Horizon VR game because I was expecting from the little bits of trailers that I seen that it was going to be a full Horizon game but in VR. Now, I'm not dumb. I wasn't expecting it to be as big and as expansive as the first or second game, but I was expecting a lengthy and detailed VR game, an adventure with open world elements, RPG elements, and just a really good AAA first-party adventure game in the Horizon universe, and that's not what the game is. From what I've seen and heard, it's more like an advanced tech demo where there's a lot of rock climbing and not too much combat or story, and it's not really a full game, which is disappointing, especially at the price they're charging for it. I just expected more from you, Sony. You had some really good franchises, and you could have made some really good games with them. You could have done a really good Horizon game. You could have made a sequel to Blood and Truth, which is amazing on the first PSVR1. I mean, they didn't even do a VR Worlds 2 with a load of cool experiences for you to try. They had so many options and they just didn't invest in any of them, which was a bit of a disappointment. At the moment, there's a ton of games on PSVR1, and a lot of them are really cheap. You've seen in the recent sales, if you're on this channel regularly, that you can pick up a lot of them for like £1.50, which is dirt cheap, and they're really good VR games as well. Right now, I would say if you just want a VR headset to play, you're better off picking up the first one and buying a load of cheap games, and just having a ton of fun playing a load of games for very little money. Now, don't get me wrong, the PSVR1 is going to basically be dead at this point, right? No one's going to develop games for it anymore that aren't already in development. So within 6 months to a year, there's not going to be any more games released, I wouldn't have thought, and that'll be the end of that platform. But there's still a ton of content on it, and it's a really good value experience. Especially if they're going to drop the price to get rid of them in the next year or so, it might be a really good deal to pick one up and play a ton of VR stuff really cheap. With the PSVR2, I really like the tech. The controllers aren't perfect, but I'm excited for the future of it. It's got the potential to be something special. I'm just hoping that Sony are going to put some money or power behind it, or some companies are just going to bring out some really cool games for it. And if they do, I think it'll be very successful, and the games will be really good, and you'll really be able to see what VR can do. And I hope they start porting more stuff over as well, like Skyrim VR and some other PSVR1 games they could really do with a port, and it would make a ton of money. I really wish Sony would just employ a company to do it for them. Like if Sony picked up a couple of developers and were like, look, your job's going to be to port PSVR1 games to PSVR2, and we're going to split the profit with the developers of the original, that would be really smart to me, and I don't know why they're not doing it. So I guess when it comes to the question of which one is better, I think the real answer is it depends. The PSVR2 is better in some ways. It's got much better visuals, much better headset technology. The controllers aren't perfect, so they're more of a sidestep than a straight up improvement. But in general, everything's good enough. Nothing's really bad, nothing's really disappointing. If some really big games come along, I think this headset will really shine. So if you're looking to pick up a PSVR headset, I would say if you want a load of cheap games to play, then pick up the first one. As long as you don't mind the graphics not being up to date, you'll have a lot of fun with it. But if you want something that's going to go through to the future, with a lot better games, and a lot more production value behind them I hope, then the PSVR2 one would be the one to pick up. But also there's no rush right now. You could easily leave it 6 months to a year until there's more games released, and then you can pick one up then. And who knows, by then they might have even improved it. There might be a version 2 or an iteration of it. You never know. But if you're definitely interested, I don't think you'll be disappointed with it either. I'm not a big driving game fan, but Gran Turismo 7 is supposed to be phenomenal on it. So if you're into Gran Turismo or driving games in general, it's a headset seller for you, for sure. You'll love it, and you'll have the time of your life with that game, that's for sure. So I guess I'll end this video by saying the second one is better. The PSVR2 is a better headset, but I'd also say it's not as simple as that, which you should understand by my opinions in this video. But what do you guys think? Have you picked up a PSVR2 headset? Do you own the PSVR1 headset? Or do you own both? Let me know what you think of my opinions, or what you think as well, down in the comments, and we can argue about it later. I'll be uploading the full comparison of the Walking Dead games, but I won't turn on notifications for people for that because most people won't be interested. So if you keep an eye on my channel, it'll probably be around soon, so you can see the entire gameplay footage if you want, which I've edited together with the comparison of both, which will give you more of an idea and more information if you want it. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope it contains some information that you found helpful, or at least informative in some way. Don't forget to subscribe if you like saving money on game sales, because that's what I normally do. But if you're not interested in that, don't worry about it, just leave a like on this video and be on your way. Anyway, I'll see you guys in the next video. Au revoir.